Welcome to The Straight Stitch, a podcast about sewing and other fiber arts. This is episode 57, and my name is Janet Szabo. I'll be your guide as we explore all things sewing. I did end up with a cold last week, and my voice hasn't quite recovered yet, so please bear with me. I am currently doing battle with zippers. I thought I had a fair bit of experience inserting zippers because I've made so many zipper pouches, but I decided to make myself the Ramona skirt pattern from Tilly and the Buttons, which is a very simple, dead simple pencil skirt with a side invisible zipper, and I have never done invisible zippers before. So I made myself a muslin. I got some navy blue twill fabric on sale from Joann Fabrics. It's a stretch twill, which is what the fabric calls, or what the pattern calls for, is some kind of stretch fabric. And I attempted to put the zipper in, and it took me probably 4 attempts because I kept getting the zipper and the fabric misaligned. So what I told my husband was I discovered all the ways that one can make a Mobius strip out of an invisible zipper and a skirt. But I finally figured out what I need to do to not mess that up. And I did make the muslin. I ended up having to go down a size from the size I chose. The waist was about 1 inch too large. So I made that change, and I made myself a Ramona skirt out of some pink baby whale corduroy that I got at Joann Fabrics. And it turned out really well. I'm very pleased with it. I finally figured out I've conquered invisible zippers, but I don't have anything to wear with that skirt, so I need to make something to go with it. And I've ordered some sweater knits to go with it. So when those get here, we'll see what kind of top I can make to go with that skirt. I'm currently making some adventure jackets, which is a Peekaboo Patterns pattern. And I'm making these for my friend Susan's grandsons, who are 3 and 5. And it's an adorable pattern. The pattern is very well laid out. It's in a step-by-step numbered steps. Truly kind of a choose your own adventure type of pattern because there are options as you go along. So if you choose not to do an option, the instructions tell you to skip ahead to another step. The problem is that finding separating zippers that are the correct length is a little bit tricky. So I got some that were a little bit longer because the pattern says that if you have ones that are too long, you can cut them down. However, the instructions for cutting down the zippers or shortening the zippers in the pattern are a little skimpy, and they instruct you to pull the zipper teeth off with a pair of pliers. So I tried to do that. It wasn't working very well. I ended up looking up a YouTube video and discovered that if I take a very thin razor blade, fortunately my husband shaves using the old-fashioned razor, so I borrowed one of the unused razor blades from his supply. And if you take a razor blade and very carefully insert it between the zipper teeth and the back of the zipper fabric, you can cut that line of stitching that holds the teeth in place, and they just fall off. So it took me most of one morning to get that far, but I have one zipper in one of the jackets, and I need to get a slightly longer zipper than the one that I had for the other jacket, and I'll do that the next time I run to town. And once I get those zippers in, I think the rest of the jacket will be smooth sailing. It's just kind of amusing to me that I have been fighting with zippers for the past 2 weeks. But don't let that discourage you. If I can do it, you can do it. I also made my mother a couple of reusable grocery bags. When I was visiting her in Ohio last month, she showed me one that she had, which was made out of that. It's called Olifun fabric. It's by Fairfield. I'll put the link to their website if you want to go look at it. you'll probably recognize it the minute you see it. It's something that's sort of a cross between fabric and paper, and a lot of stores are making quote-unquote reusable bags out of it. Well, she had one that she liked, but she wanted something a little sturdier, so she bought some polypropylene, I think, fabric. It's whatever the sunbrella type fabric is that Joann's carries. She bought some of that, and I brought it home and mocked up a grocery bag. And the first one I made, she said, was a little too big, so I made the second one a little bit smaller, and I'll send that off to her tomorrow, and we'll see if she likes that one. So that's what I've been working on the last couple of weeks. I did finish the I Spy quilt. It's all bound and ready to go. The baby quilt for the baby girl who was born in August. The top is done. I need to get a backing for it. I have the batting. I just need to get a backing for it. So I will pick that up in town tomorrow and get that quilted and bound, and hopefully I can get both of those off before the end of the month. The other noteworthy thing that I did this week was I bought a tripod for my phone so that I could experiment with making some videos. The quilt store where I teach in town likes to have videos to promote the classes. So a couple of months ago, I did a video for the thread class that I taught in August, and I'm teaching a ruler work quilting class next week. And the owner's daughter is doing all of the marketing. She's quite good at it. And she asked me if I would make a video to promote that class. So I went to Best Buy and I got a tripod, and I'm monkeying around with making some videos. So at some point I may move the podcast over to YouTube and do video, but we'll have to see, because there's a possibility that my father-in-law might be coming to live with us for a few months. It's a long story. I don't want to go into it here, but if he comes to live with us and needs to be on a single floor, I will have to move my office to a different room of the house, because my office is here on the first floor and it has doors on it, and we could close those off and make this into a bedroom for him. So I'm not quite ready to start the video stuff yet, but I will be sure to let you know when that's coming. It's kind of fun, but boy, it's another learning curve to go up. I have a birthday on the 24th of this month, and the older I get, the less willing I am to dive into all the technology. I'm having enough trouble with zippers. I also want to thank those of you who left reviews on Apple Podcasts. That's wonderful. I really appreciate that. Thank you for the feedback through email and through fan mail. And I misspoke last week when I said that I could reply to fan mail. I have no idea where my brain was when I said that, because I went back to look to see if I could reply to those of you who left fan mail for me on Buzzsprout, and there is no reply function. So either I am imagining that, or they put up a function like that and then took it down. Who knows, but I really do appreciate the feedback, so keep it coming. Last week, I told you that the episode was kind of tongue-in-cheek, that I was doing how to sew after the apocalypse, and it ended up being part 1 because I spent all of last week's episode talking about treadle sewing machines and hand crank sewing machines. So those of you who have those in your arsenal and haven't tried them yet, I hope that was encouragement for you to get them out and experiment with sewing on a treadle sewing machine. It really isn't that difficult. It just takes a little bit of practice. This week, I want to continue the discussion by talking about the supplies and the skills that you would need if, for some reason, you found yourself off-grid or in a situation where you couldn't get to the store and needed to have a supply of materials and tools and skills. So that's what we're going to talk about today. So let's talk about supplies first. What kind of supplies do you want to lay in? And I need to confess here that I have the equivalent of a small Joann Fabrics store in my upstairs, because I have accumulated things over the years, either from my mother-in-law or from my mother, or things I have picked up at the thrift store. I also tend to keep what I call a deep pantry for both food and sewing supplies because I only go to town twice a week, usually Mondays and Thursdays or Tuesdays and Fridays. And I can't be just running up to the Joann Fabrics that's 5 minutes away if I need a zipper. So I tend to keep a basic supply of things here at my house. You don't have to do that. I understand that not everybody is comfortable acquiring that much stuff. If you are a minimalist and prefer to buy for your projects as you come to them, I have great respect for you. So carry on. But just in case you want to lay in a simple supply of things that you might need, these are my recommendations. I'm going to start with sewing machine needles. I buy my sewing machine needles in packs of 100. I use Schmetz needles, and either from the Schmetz website or from Amazon or from other retailers on the internet as well, you can buy needles in packs of 100. They come in little plastic boxes. So I'm generally not afraid of running out of needles. You don't have to buy them in packs of 100, but there are a couple of sizes that I think that you should have on hand. So my recommendation would be for all-purpose sewing, get yourself some packs of universal size 80/12 or 90/14 or some of both. A universal needle is a little bit of a hybrid. It's between a ballpoint needle and a microtex needle. So it doesn't have a rounded point, but it doesn't have a very sharp point either. And a universal needle will get you through 90% of your sewing projects with no problem. I do suggest, though, having a couple of packs of ballpoint needles, jersey needles, again in sizes 80/12 or 90/14, and also some denim or jeans needles because almost all of us wear jeans at least here in the US, and we may need to repair them at some point, and having those jeans needles on hand will make that job a lot easier. You're going to need some thread, and here I would recommend a polyester thread. There's an old saying, cotton is rotten, because cotton threads will deteriorate over time. A good quality polyester thread is going to make your repairs and your mending last a lot longer. You don't need a whole arsenal of colors. I'll tell you what I tell my serger students. If you get gray, navy, red, black, and white, you're covered for almost anything that you need to do. Again, if you're feeling like you're probably going to have to do a lot of mending of jeans and other heavier items, get some heavy-duty thread. You can get it in the gold color to match the top stitching on jeans, and just have a couple of spools of those lying around. You might also want to get some upholstery thread for doing buttons and things like that. The heavier threads are good to have on hand, but again, you don't need fancy colors. Probably black and maybe gray will do you just fine. Pick up some extra bobbins for your machine. Nobody wants to get stuck with 3 bobbins that you have to either unwind the thread off of or wind another color on top of. Sometimes when you get vintage sewing machines that don't have a lot of extra bobbins with them, you will find that that's what they used to do. If a bobbin had, let's say it was a quarter full of navy blue thread and the sewist needed pink thread, she would just wind the pink thread over top of the navy thread that was already on the bobbin. So it's doable, but bobbins are not expensive. Get yourself some extra ones. You will need a nice pair of dressmaker shears or fabric scissors, and if you have to put a lock on them to keep other people from cutting paper, do it. I had a good pair of Fiskars that I used for sewing right after my husband and I got married, and I came home one night and discovered that he was cutting Formica with them. We were renovating the kitchen, and he thought scissors were scissors. I disabused him of that notion, and he has never tried to use my fabric scissors since then. He has his own set of shears that he can use however he wants. You will also want some lesser quality scissors that can be used to cut paper. And if you're feeling like you want to treat yourself, get yourself a pair of pinking shears because they come in handy too. Not all of your sewing is going to be done by machine. So make sure you have a pack of assorted hand sewing needles for doing things like mending or sewing on zippers or buttons. And while we're talking about buttons, get a supply of buttons. And honestly, these days, go to a thrift store. A lot of thrift stores have jars of buttons. I've got a couple of cookie tins that I keep my buttons in. It's fun to be able to pull out vintage buttons to use on your projects. The same thing goes for zippers. When you see zippers at a thrift store, buy them. They're usually, 50 cents a piece, 25 cents a piece, and you never know when those are going to come in handy, especially the 7-inch or 9-inch metal trouser zippers for repairing jeans and things like that. Pick up some patching material. This can be remnants of fabric that you find maybe at Joann Fabrics or Hobby Lobby. It could be packages of patches, but I will warn you that the iron-on patches do not stay on. So even if you use an iron-on patch, you will probably want to secure it with some line of stitching. You'll probably want to pick up a package or two of zipper repair kits, and these contain extra zipper pulls and stops for the tops and bottoms of zippers. It's a good way to rescue a piece of clothing that might have gotten thrown out because the zipper didn't work anymore. And while you're picking up all of these supplies to have on hand, see if you can find some vintage sewing books, because YouTube is great, but if there ever comes a time where the internet is not available and YouTube is not available, if you don't have a hard copy of something that explains how to put a zipper into a pair of pants or how to darn a sock, you're going to be in a world of hurt. So get yourself some vintage sewing books. Reader's Digest has their sewing book is a good one. Vogue has one. Singer has several. I still find myself referring to these even if I have access to YouTube. Obviously, this is kind of a continuum, and you can go nuts. You can learn every skill out there. You can learn how to spin yarn. You can learn how to weave. You can learn how to sew. You can learn how to embroider. You can learn all of these skills. And if you want to, I definitely encourage you to learn as many of them as you can. It's just, they're good to know. They're enjoyable hobbies. And everyone's going to want you on their zombie apocalypse team because nobody wants to be naked after the apocalypse. So, in the spirit of expanding your cache of supplies, I would also suggest picking up some knitting needles and some crochet hooks. Get some yarn, get some basic wool yarn, get some basic acrylic yarn in a variety of colors. Usually some neutrals would be a good choice. Again, black, gray, navy, blue, red, those kinds of things. Colors that don't show dirt, colors that will make sturdy hats and mittens. I haven't met a lot of sewists who need encouragement to go out and buy fabric. Someone said to me in one of my homesteading groups that his concern after the apocalypse is not having access to fabric. And I said, knowing how much fabric is out there in sewists' stashes, I don't think that's going to be a problem. And we can always recycle existing clothing, although the quality is nowhere near what it was 20 or 30 years ago. I'll tell you a story. Back when I was in college, this would have been the the summer between my sophomore and junior year of college. So it was the summer of 1986. And I was a biology major in college, planning to go to medical school. And so I did an internship at the National Institutes of Health in Bethesda, Maryland. And I lived with a lovely Polish lady right across the street from NIH. I walked to work every morning. And her sister-in-law was visiting from Poland that summer. Her sister-in-law did not speak any English, and my Polish is non-existent. But in the evenings, we would sit on the back porch and drink iced tea and Hanya, and I would knit. And Hanya laughed at the way I knitted because she knitted with the yarn in her left hand, and I tend to throw when I knit and knit with the yarn in my right hand. And my landlady would translate between the two of us because neither of us could speak the other one's language, but we knew we understood knitting. That was a universal language for us. And my landlady told me, translating for Hanya, that under communist rule in Poland, they didn't have access to all of the yarn and things that we have access to here in the United States. So they would unravel old sweaters and knit the yarn into new sweaters. And it's possible to do that with one caveat. In the olden days, a lot of sweaters were knit in pieces and then seamed together. And now a lot of sweaters are cut and sewn. And it's much more difficult to reclaim yarn from sweaters that have been cut and sewn because every time you get to a seam, the yarn gets cut. So if you're going to do this, when you go to the thrift store, look for sweaters that look like they haven't been sewn on a serger. The seams will look a little bit different if they've been linked together or sewn together by hand, and you will be able to carefully cut the pieces apart and unravel each piece and reclaim that yarn. Okay. You have your machine, either a treadle or a hand crank. You have some supplies. Let's talk about the skills that you're going to need to develop. And again, I touched on this a little bit briefly a little bit earlier, but think about what kinds of things you think you might need to do and what skills you'll need to learn to do them. So sewing obviously is going to be a big one, but let's back up a little and even go a bit more basic than that. You're going to need to know some machine maintenance because if something happens to your machine, you're going to have to fix it. You may not be able to take it to somebody to have them repair it. So do you need to have some extra parts on hand? That falls under supplies, but also are you going to know what to do to fix a vintage sewing machine? Maybe you need to download the manuals. All the manuals are online for virtually every model out there, especially the old Singer models. The user manuals are great, but if you can find the technician manuals, those are even better. So make sure that you'll be able to repair your machine or do basic maintenance on your machine, because otherwise it's going to be a very large paperweight. You'll probably want to acquire some mending skills, like sewing on buttons. There is an art to sewing on buttons well. You can't just attach them to the fabric. You'll want to know how to sew in it or put in a new zipper. You might want to learn some visible mending skills because not everything can be patched or darned. So you may have to do something creative to cover up a tear or cover up a hole in a piece of fabric. Maybe this is where some embroidery skills come in. When it comes to sewing on a machine, you'll want to know how to sew a basic seam and the difference in the seam allowances like 5/8 or 3/8 inch. You'll want to be able to do a hem. You'll want to be able to do some basic alterations and take things in or let things out as you need to. So some basic clothing alteration skills are great. Also some basic pattern drafting, and it doesn't have to be anything fancy. People wear t-shirts that basically look like rectangles. There's nothing wrong with that. But can you take someone's measurements and translate that into a basic pattern for a piece of clothing? Again, how far do you want to go? Do you want a basic set of skills? Do you want a master set of skills? Maybe you learn how to spin. Maybe you learn how to crochet. Maybe you learn how to knit. Maybe you learn how to embroider. And embroidery isn't just for frippery. Embroidery had a very specific purpose, because if you only had a few items and you didn't want them to be lost or stolen, you learned how to embroider your name into them because that was your label. So this has really been kind of a quick and dirty catalog of the supplies and skills that you'll need for sewing after the apocalypse. And again, I expect that some of my homesteading friends might be over here listening to these 2 episodes. So those of you who are accomplished sewists might be wondering why I'm hammering on the basics like this, and it's because there are a lot of people out there who want to prepare for every eventuality, but maybe don't want to become masters of the craft. So knowing what the basics are that they need to stock up on is going to be helpful for them. And it doesn't even have to be a grid down situation. I'm thinking of during the pandemic when supply chains were disrupted, and could I find Kona Black anywhere? No, I couldn't. So you had better believe that I've got a stash of Kona Black laid in now, because I don't ever want to be in a situation where I need some Kona Black and I don't have it. So it could be even just a supply chain disruption, a shortage in materials. Think about the kinds of projects that you like to do most often and what would happen if you didn't have access to those supplies. I sometimes think that we're a bit spoiled having ready access to just about anything that we can imagine. And you've heard me talk a little bit about the community that I live in called Mountain Brook here in Montana. The people that moved into this area in the early 1900s, getting to Kalispell, it's a trip I make in half an hour now in my car. Back in those days, it was a wagon ride and then a ferry ride and then another wagon ride. So they didn't go to town very often. And I've heard stories about our Mountain Brook Ladies Club and the plays that they used to put on in the winter for entertainment, because those people had to devise their own entertainment. And the ladies club would come up with these costumes, and maybe they used somebody's old curtains to make them, or they tore apart several other pieces of clothing and cobbled them back together into something new. I tend to think that those kinds of limitations on supplies and materials fuels creativity rather than stifling it. Okay, here endeth that sermon. I want to thank everybody again who's sent feedback in either via email or fan mail, or left a comment, or left a review on Apple Podcasts. I can't tell you how much that means, because that really does help other people find us. So if you want to leave feedback for me, you can email me at janet@janetzabo.com. You can send fan mail. There's a little button at the beginning, or it might be at the end of each podcast description on Apple Podcasts and Spotify, and that goes to Buzzsprout, where I host my podcast. You can leave comments on the show notes page, and the show notes can be found on the podcast website, and that's www.thestraightstitchpodcast.com. There's a show notes page for each episode of the podcast, and you can find links to some of the patterns and resources that I've discussed here today. If you forget how to get to the show notes, you can always go to my website, which is www.janetzabo.com, and that has links to my Big Sky Knitting Designs website and to the podcast website, and also to the blog, which is where I have been posting pictures of my sewing projects. So you can see what I've been working on there and hear about life here in Montana. As always, I hope you have a wonderful week. And until our next episode, I hope you get to go sew something. And I hope it doesn't have zippers.